Human trafficking is a transnational crime. Yes, I'll say that again, transnational crime. And it undermines global security and stability. It fuels organized crimes. It fosters corruption, and it threatens the rule of law. So by prioritizing prevention and education, I think that I'm helping to contribute to a safer world where individuals are protected from exploitation and where criminals can face justice. And
The Ms. Texas Show is a voice of hope for victims, survivors, advocates, and community leaders against gender-based violence to share their stories and resources. We began showcasing life in Texas. Today we are impacting lives not only in Texas, but also around the world. Under our segment Military Time, we run this segment in partnership with the National Veterans Chamber of Commerce. We invite military and veterans who have overcome traumatic events to share their experiences during and after their military service. Under our Beauty segment, we invite fellow pageant winners and contestants, artists, musicians, actors, models, and dancers, and last but not least, our survivor leaders from family violence, sex trafficking, sexual assault, stalking, and other traumatic events who are ambassadors for these causes to share their lives and the impact they have made. To become a guest on our show, email us at MsUSATexas@gmail.com. If you would like to support victims and survivors of gender-based violence, make a tax-deductible donation to Hope Pyx Global at www.hopepyxglobal.org.
All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of the TheMsTexasShow. And today we have a very special guest, Miss Lady T. Thompson. And I had the honor of meeting Lady T just recently, and I was like so thrilled by all the work that you're doing. And I said, you know what, why don't I invite you? And we're so honored to have you here, Lady T.
Likewise, thank you so much. Thank you so much. The honor is mine.
So, I have a long bio of Miss Lady T, and I'm gonna just share a little bit of all the great work that you're doing. But after all, I will let you explain, tell us your story and how did you get about doing what you're doing.
Lady T. Thompson is the principal of the international organization agrobase.org and the founder of Casual Queens, an emergency social enterprise. Using Thompson's she power, ideas, and causes are moved from following to followed, and from obscurity to prominence. In addition to facilitating international economic development, Ms. Thompson facilitates U.S. and foreign investment. Her current roles are co-chair of the United Nations Association of the USA Women's Affinity Group and the Convention to Eliminate All Forms of Discrimination Against Women CEDAW Committee and Gender Equality Expert. Among her professional advocacy responsibilities are women's self-sufficiency, equity and equality, African descendant diaspora inclusion, youth and women's empowerment, agriculture and entrepreneurial skill transfer, and investment matchmaking for women and minority companies. T. Thompson is a global citizen who shapes economic growth, strategies, collaboration, and implementation across sectors and continents to advance women's empowerment, living wages, human rights defenders, and sustainable development goals.
I know that, as I mentioned, when I met you, I was like, I know we talked about, I was like, if there's any takeaways from this meeting, I think you're on my top 2. I was so thrilled to have met you. So such an honor and welcome again, Lady T. Please tell us more about yourself and how you started doing this great work.
Well, thank you again. I like to say I'm just Lady T from Detroit, and I understand what marginalization is. I come from a time, an era, a decade, decades ago when Detroit was dubbed the most dangerous place in the world. I grew up in an environment where I've seen a lot of atrocities. It almost was like it was a conflict zone as it relates to drugs, shootings, just being non-served, not even being served. So there's a lot of commonality in the work that I've done. So as a result of coming up in that environment, I now have transitioned from being a local gender equality advocate to being a global human rights defender. And so that encompasses a lot. I've taken my lived experiences. I've taken human rights, which includes human trafficking. I've taken that discussion everywhere I've attended. I've been to 89 countries now, I'm so happy to say. And I love to talk about how we can bring input, output, and impact to others. So that's the summation of me. I know all of those wonderful accolades are great, but I'm just a regular human being like each and every one that's out there today.
Well, and that's another thing I was so impressed about you. When I met you, I've met a lot of people. There are some people who have done great work. They're like up high there, but you're so humble. When we met, I'm like, not to mention our shared fashion, our glasses together, right? I'm like,
Yes.
I'm like, oh my God, I love your fashion. But it's so nice to feel your warmth. You're being so humbled of the great work and all the achievement that you already are doing. Like you said, all those acclimates, some of them I was even having trouble pronouncing. But I think really when it comes down to, the work, I've been to Detroit, only the airport, but I'm an immigrant myself. So I've heard about, the crimes in Detroit and everything. And I really applaud you for all the great work that you're doing from a local advocate to a global advocate. And you mentioned that, I don't even know where to start to ask you all the questions, right? So you've been to like 89 countries. I know that we sometimes go to events, they say, okay, raise your hand if you've been to 5 countries, 10 countries, and the number goes down. But I must say, you are the only person I heard that, it's more than 50. That's like 89 is like almost doubled. So to give us a global view, a lot of us are beginning to understand, okay, these are the situation, what is happening in our country, and some of them still don't yet understand. So can you give us sort of like an overview of what's happening in our country and what is happening from the global standpoint of view?
Okay, so I'm going to give you a depiction coming from my lens. My lens is simple. It's very, very simple. Everyone has to eat. So what I've learned in terms of the commonality of economics and just everyday people that's out there is there are 2 factors that impact us. We are impacted by capitalistic societies or societal norms, and that breeds into either making money or saving money, no in betweens. And what I found is the largest contributor to a lot of the atrocities, a lot of the human rights violations and needs and impact to marginalized communities has something to do with agriculture, because everyone has to eat. So rather you have someone that is in the belt or the horn of Africa that's picking cashews, or a woman that is picking shade nuts, to someone that's in Detroit or in Houston or in Phoenix, Arizona, everyone still has to eat. And women and children are the first that's impacted when there's a crisis, when there is conflict, or any climatic disasters. So in understanding that originally in, I would say 2010, it was this big, huge economist convention that somehow or another I went to. And I'm not an economist. I love economists. I don't know how women can say, yes, I want to be an economist. I digress. I went to this conference and I learned that by 2050, it was projected or forecast that there would be over 9 billion people on the planet. And with 9 billion people on the planet, and an urbanization swell happening, not just locally, rather you're in any of the urban areas or even rural areas, you can see how development is happening, to being in any country around the world. If you look around, urbanization is happening. So my question was then, and it still applies to now, if urbanization is happening, where are the farmers going? Because there's a misconception that it's commercialized farming that feeds us. And globally, 80% of small scale farmers is who feed us globally. So if you have urbanization moving on, who's going to feed us if all the farms are going? Because we have new townhouses, we have new developments of homes. We have all of this new land for shopping and stores. Who's going to feed us? So that is the commonality from a global lens. In addition to that, I also realized that a lot of the atrocities in the human rights piece come with that, because women are not always at the decision-making table. And as I talked about conflict, crises, and COVID, women are impacted by those. So that's how I kind of got started. And right now it has driven me to really be an advocate for everyone. I don't segregate any pocket of people. You know, if you're an underdog, I'm there for you. I'm in the cause. So marginalization for immigrant or migratory communities, marginalization for vulnerable populations, whomever they are, I am a defender for all of that. And I'm so privileged and humbled to be that.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, to kind of really boil down to the root cause of our global issue when it comes to food. Like you said, everyone has to eat. And wow, 9 billion population. I'm just trying to imagine, like, are we gonna be crowded, like stacked on top of each other? What kind of, just like sort of having like a visual view. But as far as I can imagine a couple of things. Like you said, women are not on, the leading table. You are on the leaders table, and I'm working on like different councils as well. And I recall that I recently spoke at the law conference, and we had this 30 by 30. At first I didn't understand. I'm like, 30 by 30, what? This thing is smaller than 30 by 30. So what they're saying is like they're hoping that the law enforcement table, that we're hoping by year 2030, we will have 30% executives that are women, that are speaking, that are speaking on our behalf, that are taking the charges of the decision makings. So it's amazing that you are already, leading this effort to help us. Now, since you're, really on a global view and talk about the food, I'd like to ask you to educate our population about the Ukrainian war, because we all know that the Ukrainian war that is happening, it's very sad. But when it comes to food, some of us, and I just began to learn that end of last year, that there are a major supply of the food chain. So can you educate our population about, what is happening in Ukraine and what that is causing the damage in terms of the food supply chain?
Ooh, okay. So this is a very, very complicated and very near and dear pocket for me, because peace and security always goes with food. So the war in Ukraine has been very impactful in terms of not just actually on the land, but all of the rippled effects. And so I know that Ukraine is a huge grain player globally, but I would like to look at peace and security for conflict, and also address there are over 140 million other people of African descent that is in conflict areas too. So when we look at Sudan, Yemen, Somalia, northern Nigeria, Ethiopia, Cameroon, Haiti, we have a lot of people who are experiencing the byproduct of conflict. And so in order to really help the UN systems or the people who are being impacted, we must first realize that a person when they're hungry, they don't see right or wrong. They just see that they need to eat. And that's a very profound statement. They do not see right or wrong. So when decisions are being made about peacekeeping, political missions, security missions, they're really making decisions about hunger. And when we fail to reach consensus about hungry people and the hungry people pay a high price regardless of where the crises or the conflict is. So what I try to do is I try to bring about self-sufficiency to people who are vulnerable beyond the conflict, the crises, the climatic disasters, because when you empower a person to how they can just simply put money in their pocket, you can change their lives. And empowerment just sometimes goes with helping them to understand the three things that I like to talk about, which is input, output, and impact. So when you help anyone, regardless to the conflict, the crises, or the climatic disasters, help them understand that they have a purpose. You know, we all have a purpose, and that purpose can lead to output. It could be a personal one, and it could also be a community one. And sometimes they align hand in hand. So that's number one. The second, I try to work with communities and organizations, entities, and people and help them to understand that they have passion, you know, despite the deprivation that they're undergoing, that there's something that they are passionate about. So that passion brings about joy. So when you get joy and happiness, despite the deprivation, despite the crises, whatever is going on, notwithstanding that there needs to be a level of being trauma informed, but when you can give them some hope, you know, when you look around the room and you don't see any hope, you're the hope. So giving them some hope with their passion. Then the third is impact. So what is impact? Impact means a lot to different people. Some people, it means just having the potential that I can do something, I can live, I can survive beyond today to tomorrow. It could be the profitability, and profitability doesn't necessarily mean money, because women are 10%. Well, now post-COVID, I read that they're 17% more food insecure than men. And guess what? A woman, they'll go without eating and make sure that their loved ones are taken care of. So looking at if the profitability is just, you know, having basic needs of food, you know, this is why I do what I do. Those things, input, output, impact matters.
This is so amazing. I think, you know, this is why we clicked when we first met, because I can feel your passion. You know, you can talk about it all day long, but I can feel your passion right away, right? So it's the work that you're doing, and you work tirelessly. I apologize. I sent you a message in the middle of the night, and you reply right away. And then you were like, yes, you know what? We're gonna do that. So you're not just like a talker, you're a doer. You said, okay, yes, Eileen, let's do this. I'm gonna send this email. I'm gonna put this on the date and everything. You're making things happening, and you know, when you talk about like women and being in food insecure, I remember when I was growing up, my mother is always like, no, I'm not hungry. So she will cook the whole food off table. I'm like, mom, come eat. She's like, oh yeah, I'm just cleaning the kitchen, make sure that I don't make a mess. She already finished cooking. So we're eating, and then she sat down and she hardly eats anything. She's like, no, I just smell the grease. I'm not hungry. Then when we all finish eating, she starts eating. See what's left over. This is just like our nurturing nature of women, and that's another thing that I really applaud you about, you know, gender equality and fighting for women's rights and everything, and it's just amazing the work that you're doing. So I know we talked about, you know, in your bio you fight for the gender equality, and that's what I'm transitioning to now. So you talked about even in your bio, talk about your human rights efforts and on human trafficking and gender-based violence. Can you tell us more about the work behind the scene that you're doing?
Yes. So I'm a person and I usually do things in 3s, 5s, and 7s. So I have 3 rationales about why gender equality matters to me. And it comes under the umbrella of human rights, being a human rights defender. So the first rationale is upholding human rights. I'd like to participate in that. The second is protecting human lives because lives matter. All lives matters. The third is fostering empathy and global solidarity. So what do I mean? So I'll start with human rights. So why is human rights important to me? Well, I learned early on, and I was mentored by the late John Conyers. He was considered the dean of the House. And I learned from him that we have a civic duty to participate in upholding human rights. That's what I learned. So one of my greatest quotes, and I know it's a quote that a lot of people say, but I try to apply it in all that I do, is injustice anywhere is a justice to threat everywhere. Martin Luther King Jr. said that. So when I think about human rights and gender equality, there are 3 elements that comes up under it. The first is human dignity. Human rights are based on fundamental principles of human dignity. Everyone deserves human dignity. Not some people, not a few people, everyone. So preventing and combating human trafficking is crucial to upholding human dignity and ensuring that all individuals is crucial. All individuals are free from exploitation and abuse. And so the gender equality piece comes with that automatically because women are one of the high actors, regrettably, in terms of victimship and survivorship. And I know that those words for different pockets of people mean different things. So I said them both. The second is equality and justice. Human trafficking often targets vulnerable and marginalized populations, including women, children, men, boys, migrants, and refugees. So when I promote human rights and prevention of trafficking, I'm striving to bring about a more equitable and just society for everyone under the protections of the law. Then the third piece is sustainable development. Human rights and sustainable development, they go hand in hand. They're deeply interconnected. So by preventing human trafficking and promoting education, we empower economic growth and social cohesion and overall development for everyone, every community, whether it's local or global. So ensuring human rights for all is essential to that. And then my next rationale, when I think about protecting human lives, I love a quote that's human rights are not a privilege granted by the few, but a liberty innate to every person and invisible and impossible to take away. Royal Wallenberg said that. So saving lives is important. So when I look at gender equality, when I look at human trafficking, they're saving lives. So it's a grave violation of human rights and often involving coercion, violence, and exploitation when I think about human trafficking. So by prioritizing prevention and education, just like what we're doing right now, we can potentially save a life, protect somebody, bring some awareness that every life matters. And we must work together as a world where no one is enslaved or treated as a commodity. That's so important. Then the second element of that is ending suffering. Human trafficking and gender equality all helps to have immense impact on physical, emotional, psychological suffering from its victims or its survivors. So prevention and education, prevention and education raises awareness about the signs of trafficking, and it helps bring a more gender equality and equity to survivors and helping them to recognize prevention for danger and provide support system networks for survivors. And then the third piece to that one is promoting global security. Human trafficking is a transnational crime. Yes, I'll say that again. Transnational crime. And it undermines global security and stability. It fuels organized crimes it fuels organized crime. It fosters corruption, and it threatens the rule of law. So by prioritizing prevention and education, I think that I'm helping to contribute to a safer world where individuals are protected from exploitation and where criminals can face justice. And lastly, the third rationale, fostering empathy and global solidarity. I used to just say solidarity, but now it fosters solidarity and solidity. Human rights are our common heritage, and their realization depends on the contributions that each and every one of us is willing to make, whether it's individually or collectively, now and in the future. And that's something that I learned on the walls of the United Nations. So that entails having compassion and empathy. So when we educate people, when we bring more awareness, it helps to cultivate empathy and compassion with individuals, institutions, communities. So the second is the global solidarity and solidity. Human trafficking is a global issue, and it requires international intervention and collaborations, because together we can strengthen legal frameworks, we can share best practices, we can support survivors, we can build a united front against trafficking. And last but definitely not least, strengthening democracy. When I think about respect for human rights, when I think about gender equality and advocacy, I always think about the prevention of human trafficking and all of the central components to having a thriving democracy. So when you promote education and awareness, we're empowering ourselves as individuals. We are empowering our civic duty as active citizens. We are engaging in critical thinking and advocacy for change. And we too, everybody has the ability to be a change maker, and you don't need permission to lead. And lastly, it helps society to uphold human rights. And that's the value in all that I do. And my humble perspective of those three rationales.
That's amazing. You have said so much. You talked about just like every life matter, all lives matter, and it really that explains all. Regardless of your gender, race, nationality, social, economic status, whether you have a immigration status or not, this is human lives. This is human rights. And this is truly a transnational problem. It is a global problem. I often say that it takes an army, it takes a village, and I'm afraid in this case, it really takes global villagers for us to all fight this together. And it takes leaders like yourself, who can join our forces together so that we can fight this. When I was making your introduction, you have mentioned the CEDAW in your bio. So for me, it's something new that I have recently learned, and it's a shame that the United States has not implemented in many of our states, or should I say few. So I would like you to sort of introduce to our audience a little bit more about what is CEDAW and how can our audience be of help, and maybe whether, just like you said, if everyone they can be a change maker. So if they choose to be a change maker, what can they do to help making our world a better place, to show their compassion, to show their empathy?
Well, thank you for this. I'm so excited that you asked me about CEDAW. All right. So CEDAW, the United Nations, is an entity, a system that was formed 77, almost 78 years ago. And in 1979, the then President Jimmy Carter, my favorite president, and here's why: it's because of the CEDAW, nothing with politics, is he signed on to this convention and with this international treaty and the convention to eliminate all forms of discrimination against women. In 1979, he signed on to it. So in 1980, you would have thought that the United States would have ratified it. Well, let me tell you, out of the 193 member states of the United Nations, there are 6 countries that have not ratified, and ratified means adopted. They've not adopted this treaty. It doesn't really change anything in domestic laws, but it just, we're acknowledging that we want to eliminate all forms of discrimination against women. So the 6 countries that have not signed on out of the 193 member states to this treaty are Sudan, Somalia, Iran, Palau, Tonga, and the United States of America. The United States, the USA. Now, that just shudders my soul every time I think about it. So what I'm happy to say is that we have some wonderful organizations that are doing some things, including United Nations Association. So I'm the co-chair of the ad hoc committee for CEDAW, or Cities for CEDAWs. So we're promoting the adoption of getting ordinances in cities to get CEDAW locally. I'm happy to report that Karen Moshauser with UNA Washington, D.C. has worked on getting D.C. to adopt CEDAW. But here's what happened. Because D.C. is a colony and not a state or not a city, it had to go to Congress. So it had to go to Congress and no one really could talk about it. It was like a secret. It was at their desk because things that are laws that are coming to place for Washington, D.C. has to go to Congress. So it sat there, and if you don't make any noise, it passed. So regrettably, they dropped the C, the convention part, and it's called EDAW, Elimination to Discriminate All Forms of Discrimination. So it passed locally. So that's a local effort. But for the country, I'm looking forward to having some advocacy in October with the United Nations Association USA to start advocacy campaigns so that we can contact our our congressional leaders, as well as our city, our municipalities, so that they can adopt ordinances, because this is very important. You would have not thought that this would not have been adopted. I'm happy to say that then Senator Joe Biden was the only senator on the Foreign Relations Committee to bring it to a hearing. So when Joe Biden, now President Biden, when he was a senator, he got it to a hearing, but regrettably, it did not get passed. It was at the end of the term of the congressional cycle. So we are still in that fight. That is currently on the gender policy agenda for the White House in terms of adopting CEDAW, but I'm looking forward to some congressional hearings, briefings, advocacies, so that every woman in the United States can be acknowledged for towards eliminating all forms of discrimination, because it comes in so many different lenses. And I learned during CSW, which is the Commission on the Status of Women, in March of this year, that the implicit biases to women, whether you're uneducated or you have 4 PhDs, we live in a society, even as it relates to science, technology, engineering, and math, or if you call it STREAM, or if you call it STEM, that women still have overt biases in the workplace. Can you believe that if you have 4 PhDs, you're being discriminated? And you're being discriminated because of implicit biases. Like there's a Matilda bias. Like if they take your credit, they will take your research and use it and not give you acknowledgement for it. Or if you are of childbearing years or you just got married, they don't give you promotions. They don't make you even a tenured professor at some academic institutions, because the assumption is you're going to start having kids and you're going to walk away from being a tenured professor. So we are still dealing with even biases of pay today in the United States of America. So those are just a couple of small examples about why CEDAW matters. And I'm so happy to be in this movement to change the perspective or the trajectory for eliminating all forms of discrimination for all women.
Thank you so much, Lady T. This is something close to my heart. As you know, gender-based violence and gender equality. And that's why I said I had on the agenda that I must ask you about. And for me, this, like, you know, it's a shame that United States was the leader who was like fundamental to start the United Nations and a lot of its initiatives. But for us to be amongst, you know, some of the, I guess all of them are developing countries, to not have ratified this treaty, I am completely shocked, like I said, when I heard about it. So I know that you can count on me on joining your campaign and advocacy work and calling all of our supporters here, you know, to join you on this effort, because this work has to be done. And you know, you talked about the gender bias in workplaces, the gender bias period. I recently had the experience. You know, I work with a lot of NGOs, and we're organizing what I mentioned, upcoming conference and several events coming up. And I honestly do not recall, but I had some people tell me, you know what, you need a man to talk to them because they wouldn't listen to you. And I'm like, seriously, you know. Yes, yes, I am very shocked about this situation, and I think, you know, the work that you're doing is essential, and Karen has done a great job, but we really need to ratify this in all cities, in all states, in our country. And I'm looking forward to this effort in October and see how I can join the effort. Now, yeah, that being said, you know, you are doing so many wonderful you know, initiatives and so much work that you're doing. With that being said, for our audience who are listening, if you can, you know, give them a takeaway, what would you tell them?
Thank you for that question. You know, when I think about what takeaways, or I have a call to action. So my first element of the call to action is educate and empower. My second is support organizations. And then my third is advocacy for policy change. So what do I mean by that? So the first one, educate and empower. We have to take an active role in educating ourselves about human rights and the issue of human trafficking. We have to attend workshops, seminars, training programs. We can go to the library. I know that seems ancient. You can order books, but we all need to gain a deeper understanding of the causes, the consequences, and the prevention strategies related to trafficking, because everyone is vulnerable to it. It's no respect of person, age, ethnic group, sexual orientation. Anyone could be prone to it. So by sharing your knowledge and raising awareness within your community, you can empower others to join the fight against trafficking. So that's one. Secondly, supporting organizations. So what do I mean with supporting organizations? Getting involved with organizations that work towards the prevention of human trafficking and supporting survivors. Volunteer your time. Time is the greatest commodity that we have, but you know, you can volunteer your time, you can donate resources, you can participate in fundraising efforts to contribute to the success. By supporting organizations, you can help provide crucial services such as victim support, legal assistance, rehabilitation, or awareness for awareness campaigns. The third call to action, I would say, or takeaway, is to advocate for policy change. Engage in advocacy efforts. Yes, you too can engage in advocacy efforts. You do not have to be a seasoned advocate to get engaged. You can just be a person and say, this issue matters to me. So it can help and influence policymakers and legislators by simply picking up the phone and calling them. You can change your vote. You can impact their influence. So to help prioritize human rights and enact effective anti-trafficking laws and policies, write letters, sign petitions, call your legislators locally and your congressional legislators, and participate. I can't say it enough. Participate in grassroots movements that aim to combat human trafficking and or that helps to bring about gender equality. By raising your voice, not my voice, your voice, and advocating for stronger measures to prevent trafficking, you can help shape a society that values and protects the rights of all individuals. So that would be my takeaway.
Thank you so much, Lady T. So Lady T's call to action is to educate and empower, to support organization, and to advocate for policy change. And I love what you said about having your voices heard. And it doesn't have to be, anything big, whether it's a small effort to make a call, to write to your representatives, your congressman, woman, and participate in those grassroots efforts. The voices in numbers are really, counted. And we recently did our effort in DC, and I was just thrilled to see all the powerful voices that were there, but we need more. And thank you so much for being the leader in this work, Lady T. And once again, I am so honored to have met you personally. We are so honored to have you on this show, and we can't wait to hear more about the updates from you in the future after the October campaign to see, we would love to bring you back on and share with you, our audience about the updates that you have. But thank you again for being a guest. You are watching the Miss Texas show. If you find this show helpful, please share and subscribe and share this voice. Remember, voices in numbers are counted, and we need your help. And together, we can make our world a better place. Thank you again, Lady T, for joining us.